Welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the European University Institute for the annual Ursula Hirschmann Lecture. And tonight, our distinguished speaker is Viviane Reding, whom I will more fully introduce later. The Hirschmann Lecture is, as always, organized by Eric Jones, the director of the Robert Schuman Center, and myself. My name is Benno Gamal. I'm holding the chair for the history of gender and sexuality at the EUI's history department. And this time around, we're doing this, and it's really a great cooperation with the Alcide de Gasperi Center, and Emmanuel Molondrol is also here. And also in cooperation with the Historical Archives of the European Union, and Dieter Schlenker is also here, welcome. And of course, I also want to welcome Elena Danescu, who is really from the Luxembourg Center for Contemporary and Digital History, who came up with the idea for all this in the first place and facilitated the contact with Madame Reding, and we are deeply grateful for that, Elena. Also, I want to kind of say that this wouldn't have been possible without the great help from Sarah Bernstein, Lisa Benvenu, and above all, Francesca Parenti, whose organizational skills were indispensable as always for this event. It is now my great pleasure to hand the floor over to Patricia Nantz, President of the European University Institute, who very kindly agreed to honor this event, and our distinguished guest by sharing a word of welcome.
Thank you, Benno, and ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, good afternoon, or good evening. In Italy, the La Sera begins very early. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all here today, and I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Benno Gamal for the kind invitation to open this key lecture. We gather to celebrate today the legacy of a remarkable woman, Ursula Hirschmann, who understood that building a united Europe required not just political vision, but an active reimagination of how power could be shared and exercised collectively across the continent. So today, we warmly welcome Madame Viviane Reding, former Vice President of the European Commission, and more generally, a very well-known pioneering figure in European politics. I leave the introduction to Benno later, but let me just say that being commissioner 3 times in a row for 15 years is already quite remarkable. And Madame Reding left a lasting mark on equity at the highest level. So she was, for example, instrumental advocating the EU's corporate gender quota legislation, and more generally laying the foundation of a European era of justice. Madame Reding's career exemplifies a generation of women who have reached the highest echelon of European governance, an achievement that would have seemed impossible just a few decades ago. And yet, as we celebrate these achievements, we must also ask ourselves the harder questions. What does it mean when women reach the top? There's a persistent narrative that suggests women in power govern differently, more collaboratively, more justly, with greater empathy. Yes, women minoritized position in patriarchal societies often shaped an education emphasizing cooperation over conflict, solidarity over competition. But we must be honest about the selection mechanisms at work. To reach positions of power in structures designed by and for men, women must always and often become more competitive, more individually focused, more masculine, if you wish, than men themselves. Contemporary power structures don't simply exclude women, like other parts of society, it transforms those who succeed within them. And the qualities we claim to value in women leaders, collaboration, care, collective thinking, are often precisely what must be repressed to climb the ladder. Besides, women who reach the highest positions are dramatically over-selected. They carry more degrees, come from more privileged backgrounds, have proven themselves more times over than their male counterparts ever needed to. This filtration system ensures that only the most resourced, more relentless women make it through. The same kind of pattern appears throughout academia. The European Institute for Gender Equality reports that women hold approximately 26% of senior academic positions in EU universities. in European universities, despite representing nearly 48% of doctoral graduates. So the gender gap is even more pronounced in science and technology. Women, the report states, must publish more than men to be perceived as having the same level of achievement, and once published, women are cited less than men. They face significantly lower odds of earning tenure than men, despite a comparable publication record. So what do we do with this knowledge? The answer cannot simply be to encourage more women to lean in, to compete harder, to suppress the very qualities we claim to value. As Audre Lorde, an American feminist writer and professor, reminded us, the master's tool will never dismantle the master's house. So if generally we value collaboration over competition, collective wisdom over individual brilliance, care over conquest, then we must build institutions that embody these values. This brings me to the role of universities, and particularly institutions like the European University Institute. Universities can be fantastic laboratories for alternative forms of leadership, for alternative operational systems of institutions, spaces where we can draw on the collective intelligence and cultivate care. Instead of training the next generation to fight their way to the top, what if we trained them to build strong solidarities? What if tenure committees value collaboration as much as individual publication? What if scientific innovation was geared towards serving the common good rather than the enrichment of a selected few? Allow me to emphasize this, given the importance of Madame Reding has attached to European technological research platforms. And I remember a remarkable dinner we had in Luxembourg in June, where you sat next to me and you amazed me with an incredible technical knowledge on quantum computers, of which I have very little knowledge, so I was really impressed. Technologies are not neutral. They reflect the values and power structures of their designers. When the science and industry celebrates individual genius over collective intelligence, we build technologies that amplify existing hierarchies. Universities have a role to play in imagining more democratic, more distributed technological futures. As the philosopher Nancy Fraser calls us, for us to think beyond progressive neoliberalism, beyond simply inserting diverse faces into unjust structures. Madame Reding's achievements are remarkable precisely because she succeeded in a system not designed for her success. Following her deep involvement in the construction of an integrated EU, we can ask, what might Europe look like if we redesign the operational system of political institutions? Ursula Hirschmann believed in a Europe built on federal principles, on shared sovereignty. Perhaps the question of women in leadership and the question of European integration are, at the core, the same question. How do we build institutions worthy of our highest values? And with this, I would go back to Benno.
Thank you very much, Patricia. This event is also part of the program of the conference Women in Europe, so kind of very much to the topic, which we launched this morning and whose participants I also would like to cordially welcome here. This conference is generously supported by the Université du Luxembourg, and it's now my pleasure to give the floor to Jens Kreisel, who is here virtually, rector of the University of Luxembourg, who sent us a video-recorded welcome message. So we now play Jens Kreisel's welcome message.
Dear President of the European University Institute, dear Patricia, Madame la Présidente de la Fondation du Mérite Européen, chère Viviane, Excellencies, dear professors, researchers, and students. It is a special privilege to address you from Luxembourg while you gather in Florence, a city that has marked the history of science, culture, and Europe. As a physicist and material scientist, I cannot help but recall that it was here in Florence that Galileo Galilei challenged established truth and opened new ways of observing the world. His instruments, preserved nearby you, remain a lasting symbol of intellectual audacity. They remind us that scholarship is like a lens. It brings hidden details into focus and allows us to see further than before. That same spirit of questioning, of rethinking inherited knowledge, animates the work we celebrate in this 2025 edition of the Ursula Hirschmann Annual Lecture. In this context, the European University Institute, the historical archives of the European Union and our University of Luxembourg are organizing the conference Women in Europe, Interdisciplinary Approaches, Innovative Prospects and New Sources. It brings together leading scholars and key figures to explore how women have shaped and continue to shape Europe's history and future. Allow me to highlight 3 points. First, our partnership with the European University Institute delivers results. Together we train young researchers, open archives and develop digital methods that reshape the study of European integration. Luxembourg's role in Europe is more than history. It endures today in the leadership of figures such as Viviane Reding. Second, it highlights both the opportunities and the responsibilities of research in the era of artificial intelligence. Our University of Luxembourg, our Center for Contemporary and Digital History, is pioneering work in this field. By combining digital archives, oral history and AI-driven tools, the C2DH embodies the power of interdisciplinarity, helping to uncover forgotten voices and reconstruct Europe's past with new depth. At the same time, these technologies remind us that universities must foster responsibility, ethics, and the important critical thinking in how we teach, conduct research, and share knowledge with society. Third, gender perspectives are not an optional lens. They are essential to grasping the full complexity of Europe. For me, this is not only an academic conviction, but also a very personal one. When women's experiences are excluded, our understanding of Europe remains incomplete. By bringing women's roles in politics, culture, diplomacy and network into focus, we build a history that is more accurate and more just. Let me conclude by warmly thanking our colleagues at the European University Institute Florence and all our partners for their dedication to bringing this new synergy to life. May this conference inspire new research, encourage meaningful exchanges, and strengthen the bonds of our European academic community, with Florence and Luxembourg deeply engaged in this mission. As Galileo showed us here in Florence, a lens can change how we see the world. This conference is such a lens, bringing overlooked details into focus and allowing us to understand Europe with greater clarity. I wish you all an excellent conference, and I'm looking forward to my next visit in Florence. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup à Luxembourg. And now we're getting closer to what you all came here for. Viviane Reding's talk on women in the EU, breaking barriers, building futures. Some of you, most of you know Viviane Reding and the great things she did and continues to do, but some of you, might want to be reminded. So it's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. I couldn't think of anybody better suited to talk about women in the European Union, because, kind of all the things you achieved and all the also kind of the experiences you made along your very successful career as a European leader. You are, it has been mentioned, the Président of the Fondation du Mérite Européen. You began your career as a journalist in Luxembourg, and then Dr. Reding changed sides and became a politician in the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. And in 1989, she was elected a member of the European Parliament. And from 1999 to 2014, she served as a European Commissioner, holding the office of the Vice President of the European Commission from 2010 to 2014. Viviane Reding has significantly shaped several portfolios during her time at the European Commission. From 1999 to 2004, she was responsible for education and culture, and in that capacity she initiated, among other major projects, the Erasmus World Program. And there is no small number of people in this very room here and here at the UI who continue to benefit from what you have done for international academic mobility. As Commissioner for Information Society and Media from 2004 to 2010, Viviane Reding pushed several agendas. Her in terms of direct positive impact, and we just talked about this before, in terms of direct positive impact on people's everyday lives, most well-known achievement was, I would say, the reduction of mobile roaming charges, which was really kind of, what made many people believe in the positive effects of the European Union, and really a game changer, so thanks a lot for that. Dr. Reding continues to take a keen interest in questions around information society, and Patricia already mentioned quantum computing. As the first vice president in the Barroso II Commission from 2010 to 2014, Viviane Reding shaped EU policies on justice, fundamental rights, and citizenship. She was, among other things, at the forefront of the battle for the rule of law in Hungary and against Orbán Viktor and his anti-liberal policies. She was also a prominent voice within the European People's Party that clearly demanded the exclusion of Orbán's party Fidesz. Viviane Reding strove and strives for a European area of justice that is more inclusive, equal, and citizen-focused. She champions human rights, also for ethnic minorities and people with disabilities. And she pushes, and now we get to the topic of this talk as well, for stronger protection for women and for gender balance in leadership. Most prominently with the Women on Boards Directive that finally entered into force in 2022. Now there is a question of implementation of that directive, and that takes us to the heart of tonight's topic. The progress achieved, the barriers surmounted, and the pivotal objectives that remain to be met. We are very much looking forward to your talk. Madame Reding, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for all this kind introduction, and thank you for your presence and for your interest, because without interest one cannot learn something, and without learning one cannot achieve something. So good to see all of you here. Most of all because it is the 75th year of the Schuman Declaration, the 50th year of the European University Institute, and the 24th year of the Ursula Hirschmann annual lecture. What a year! And what memories! And what an honor to stand here before this impressive audience and deliver the 2025 annual lecture. A lecture named after a courageous pioneer who was fighting for a free and united continent already many decades before the treaties founding our European were published. Ursula Hirschmann's engagement shows that personal experience is as important as legal texts. On that basis, allow me to start not with a scientific analysis of text, but with some of my personal experiences as a child and a young woman, which deeply was influenced my later political action for equality and for women's rights. I was born and raised in a small steel factory town in the south of Luxembourg. At that time, the public streets were the playgrounds, and the sons of Italian emigrants were the play poles. No daughters around. They had no right to go out of the house. But a lot of shouting, fighting, and having fun. Until a loud voice was heard, "Basta la pasta." The mother had spoken, the boys obeyed, and the shouting stopped immediately. And the small Luxembourgish girl had learned several things. First, Italian language. Second, if you want to compete with the boys, don't be afraid of shouting. Third, the power of an Italian mama. And fourth, I have to help these girls to get out of the house, because being a lone girl in the street is not very efficient. Many years later, I was island hopping in Greece with knapsack and sleeping bag. Again, one rare girl alone around. The people I met on the islands did not ask who I was. They were interested only about who was my father. For them, I had no own identity. I was the daughter of. Back in Luxembourg, because I felt very uncomfortable with this, I had a look at the national laws. And I saw that this non-identity of females was not only a social habit, but it was a legal fact. In these times, in the 1970s, a girl was a minor of age, first under the responsibility of the father, and then under the legal responsibility of the husband. Only as a widow did she become a legally independent and responsible citizen. Fortunately, in the 70s, engaged male and female politicians changed this discrimination, introducing a legal age of responsibility for males and females alike. My learning from this was, 1, discrimination is inscribed in law and is not unusual. Second, eliminating these discriminations is possible if you find like-minded individuals for the actions. Third, I will be in my future life one who is leading the like-minded individuals to change the laws and the reality. The lessons of my childhood and as a young woman have helped me in my political action. Analyze the unfairness of society and law, develop the legal reforms, persuade other players to help with the implementation, and don't ask if you can do it, just do it. Personally, my doing started in 1979 when I was elected for the first time in the National Parliament. It went on for 40 years. I was elected during 40 years, and it was always deeply linked with a step-by-step development of the European construction. At the European level, equality was on the agenda since the beginning of the foundation of Europe. At France's insistence, the 1957 Treaty of Rome included Article 119, mandating equal pay for equal work between men and women. Why France? Because France was one of the rare countries in Europe where women were workers and not only housewives. This made the principle of equal pay part of the European law from the start, well ahead of many countries' domestic law. The move was economic, preventing wage competition by underpaying women, but also set a precedent that the European project would address social principles. Through the 1960s, however, concrete steps to implement this were limited. It fell to the European Court of Justice, years later, to give teeth to the principles written on paper. In 1970, The European Court of Justice ruled in the Dufresne versus Belgium state that Article 119, equal pay for equal work, had a direct effect, meaning individuals could invoke it in national courts. The Dufresne number 2, 1979, famously held that the equal pay principle is part of the foundations of the community beyond purely economic aims, and is condemned discrimination against women and incompatible with the EU's social objective. These judgments, sparkled by a Belgian flight attendant, Gabrielle Dufresne, challenging pay inequality, were the first victories for women's rights at the European level. And let me underline that the essential role of the European Court of Justice here, it was not the politicians who got the first steps done. It were the judges, judging on the basis of the treaty. It was not the civil society which got the changes, but the men, because the judges then were men, the men who did this because they believed in the strength of the fundamental text. And this engagement in the 70s continued hereafter. The court relied on the treaties in order to show the way to politics, which followed with establishing then by the politics of a legal floor and of directives among all member states. In this moment came in the 70s the Equal Pay Directive, 75, followed by the Equal Treatment Directive, 76, a groundbreaking law for the treatment for men and women in employment, vocational training, promotion, and working conditions. You understand, I'm speaking about a worker, the woman as a worker, not the woman as an individual, as a citizen. That came much later. In the 20th century, the movement was regularly A, general principles enshrined in the treaty, B, the Court of Justice referring to the treaties, C, directives of in European law by politicians, and C, national laws changed. Interesting to see, even today the same pattern often applies. Concerning, for instance, the Charter of Fundamental Rights of 2009, our Bill of Rights with constitutional value, the court did not wait until the politicians put that into praxis, but at once in its decision-making, it referred to the Charter. In 2011, I have the figures, that's 1 year later, 44% of the rulings of the court quoted the Charter, 13% on equality, 24% on freedoms. And interesting, the effect that the European judges had on the national judges, the national courts followed the logic. In the same year, that means 1 year after the publishing of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, the requests for preliminary rulings of national governments quoted the Charter 26% on justice and 22% on equality, which shows that these ideas, basic ideas put on paper, were brought to life by judges who respected the Constitution. And if I tell you today, judges respecting the Constitution was a normal thing, today, you start in some parts of the world seeing judges who do not respect constitutions anymore. So I would like to officially say thank you to those European and national judges for bringing equality forward. Until the end of the 20th century, women equality in Europe was linked mainly to work, while the Treaty of Amsterdam, 97, and the EU committed then to equality, including the clause 3, Article 3.2, that the community shall aim to eliminate inequalities and promote equality between men and women in all its activities. That means not only in work, women as a worker, but also woman as a human being, as a mother, for instance, as somebody who is suffering from violence. Gender beyond employment became the rule, but it really entered into text after the Charter of Fundamental Rights in 2009. From there on, the EU had to be in absolute conformity with the rule of law when it legislated. A rule of law impact assessment was obligatory for Commission legal proposal. Equality and non-discrimination became the rule in all political domains. A woman was not only merely a worker, she became a citizen in full right. This opened a complete new dimension for equality politics, away from economy-linked subjects. And here again, the Court of Justice opened a door for EU action, for instance, when it came to ratify the Istanbul Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women, a Council of Europe treaty, where a lot of governments said, no, the Commission, the European Union is not competent. Well, the court said, we are competent. It clarified the modalities of the EU accession to the so-called Istanbul Convention. The EU has competence to accede to it, and there is no legal requirement for unanimity in the Council to decide on this. That was a cultural shift in norms which took place. Equality was seen as a public rather than as a private subject. And this shifting of norms and of political priorities was strongly influenced by Europe-wide awareness campaign and by a growing influence of female leaders and lawmakers, and by the continuous work of women associations all over the European Union. But. In recent political developments, the habitual step-by-step development, it can only go forward, not back, has been hampered. Progress has been reversed and equality put into question. You know that the disruption introduced by the Trump movement in the USA is swapping over to Europe by anti-gender movements financed heavily by USA, Russia, and conservative forces in EU. And could you imagine that a country like Latvia, its political forces want to withdraw from the Istanbul Treaty, a serious rollback of women's rights? An introductory study by the German Institute for Economic Research, the DEW, sees in a long-term analysis serious differences in member states concerning the public conception of equality, the so-called equality index. Highest in Nordic countries, it is not much progressing in Germany, and it is even regressing with the young generation in Italy and Poland. A very, very dangerous development. Wehret den Anfängen, as they say in Germany. What is now the solution? How can we oppose or reverse these destructive developments? Now, I could give you some well-formulated theoretical answers, but that would not do. I prefer to present a concrete example of how political blockage can be overcome by concerted action. The Lisbon Treaty and the Charter of Fundamental Rights came in force in 2009. I told you already about that. And they cemented the non-discrimination of gender in general, in the workforce specifically, but not only. So one of the problems I was confronted with as I took over in 2010 the equality dossier as a Commission Vice President responsible for justice and equality was how to avoid a further drop of female participation at professional decision-making level, how to avoid the drastic loss of capacity, knowing that young women at that time represented 60% of university graduates, but only 14% of board positions and 7% of management responsibility. How to avoid a waste of experience and talent at a moment when society and economy were in dire need of this talent, confronted with baby boomer age groups moving into retirement. Experts, really non-feminist experts, like Deutsche Bank, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, and others, had calculated that companies with a solid female participation in management and top decision-making achieved better financial results than all male structures. Despite these findings, the old boys' networks blocked the female talent, reinforced the glass ceiling, and led to a dropout of female professionals who, at the absence of role models, gave up their future career possibilities at an early stage. After long analysis, I thought that the best way was to do legislation at European level, a directive for women on boards, aiming at having obligatory 40% of the underrepresented sex, not of women, of the underrepresented sex at the supervisory board of listed companies. If there were two candidates of equal capacity, the position had to be given to the underrepresented sex. And because I hoped that this legislation would change the reality, I put a sunset clause in it, eliminating the proposal when the goal was reached. At institutional level, the co-legislator had opposing reactions. The European Parliament had a strong majority for decisive action, whereas the Council of Ministers, national governments' representations, opposed the text under the leadership of Germany and the Netherlands. At the level of society, the development was quite different. I said that the German government opposed the text. In Germany, the women had a very strong movement. They got themselves organized. Thousands of women from all political parties signed the Berlin Declaration to have this legislation put into practice. Professional organizations launched their own pro-quota movement. Journalists went public to maintain the pressure. The movement towards self-commitment gathered very strong speed. In all parts of Europe, similar actions were set up. I give you some examples. Here in Italy, two national legislators, a young woman from the left and an elderly lady from the right presented the Quote Rosé and forced the parliament to vote for it. Famous business schools united forces to create the Global Board Ready Women Initiative, uniting on a platform the CVs of 8,000 female MBA executives coming from 110 business schools around the world. They dispelled the myth that there were not enough women to fill the board positions. And they also created the first global criteria for independent board members, regardless of gender, and applied these criteria in vetting the board-ready women candidates presented for consideration by the European publicly listed corporations. Other courageous and strong women took the stage and showed that female talent exists. The Global Telco Women Association made headlines in the Barcelona influential GSMA World Conference. At the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2018, the heading was taken over by an all-female presidency, with, among others, Christine Lagarde, then president of the IMF, Erna Solberg, head of the Norwegian government, Fabiola Gianotti, renowned physicist, among others. 7 world-changing women from all walks of life had not only broken the glass ceiling, but also shattered the prejudice that women aren't up to the task. And they became the role models, which gave courage to the young girls. If they can do it, we can do it, was the answer. If they can speak up and join forces with women to network, well, then everybody can. And the collective action of those women led to a direct, concrete success. In several member states, national laws on non-discriminatory access to supervisory boards were put in place, and the number of women in responsibility grew at an average from 12% in 2012 to 34% in 2022, without European law. Alone, the speaking about and the pushing of the society abroad made a difference. In the professional world also a change was taking place. The only place where no change was taking place was the Council of Ministers. Until the moment when the political game changed, and that was the former Labour Minister, Ursula von der Leyen, a fervently ally since 2012, became President of the EU Commission. There was a new German government. France, a strong ally also since 2012, took over the Council presidency for 6 months. The female alliance in the European Parliament had been reinforced over the year, and the force of all this together made that the European law was finally, after 10 years, voted. In the meantime, the companies themselves have understood that the scientific evidence which had been brought by their peers 10 years ago was true. On November 2023, the Financial Times quoted BlackRock: "Businesses with better gender balance out-earn peers." And the Bank of America found that the US public companies with diverse boards had a higher return on equity and a lower volatility in earning than their less diverse peers. Quod erat demonstrandum. So we needed 10 years, from 2012 to 2022, to get it done. And it was alone the not giving up, the speaking loudly and and really trying to do it. And it was so interesting because it was women from all backgrounds, from all political parties, and from all countries. And together they won. Well, you see, when I speak from my years as a small girl to my years as European Commissioner and today, well, we have come a long way, a real long way. From Ursula Hirschmann, early resistant and courageous fighter for a free and united Europe in wartime and long before the first texts were written. From the social reality of those times, where women were minors of age, whatever age they had, they didn't count, to the step-by-step building of equality rules, with the help of visionary men, yes, the judges, as I told you, they were, today you have a mixed in the courts of females and males. At that time, you had only male judges. They did it. Building equality rules step by step by visionary individuals and by courageous lawmakers. And then it helped, of course, because with the years, you had more and more women as politicians. And in the 21st century, we have not reached equality in numbers, but we are nearly there. The growing influence of women organizations also, not only making tea parties, but speaking up and not giving up, and to the economic and social role of women to nearly equal participation in today's society. It was a long way, but it was worth the fight and the endurance. So with this in mind, that together we can do it, and if we do not stop speaking about it, arguing for it, educating, Madam President, the next generation to go to the right direction, then we are going to build also the success for the future. Ursula Hirschmann's example shows us the way. Thank you.